want is money, money.
This is Evie, my nanny.
Why won't you pay me?
I play Evie de la Rosa, and I think Evie, of all the characters, no offense to the other Filipino characters in the show, but I think Evie perfectly encapsulates the heart of a Filipino.
Hoy, nako, bunso. Well, poor monster. He doesn't know that your nanny is the best monster catcher.
We're caring, we're affectionate, we're survivors, and I think if given the opportunity, we have the chance to shine.
I didn't see that coming.
And I think that's to be said about a lot of Filipinos, just given where we're at in the country in terms of poverty and lack of opportunity. Just given the chance, we can achieve so much more. So I think that's Evie in a nutshell.
The Unusual Suspects is the first major representation of Filipino-Australians on Australian television. But I'm just curious, what's the situation in America? I mean, how are Filipino-Americans represented?
I don't know if it's the same in Australia as it is here, but if, there's a breakdown for a character that's Asian, they don't really mean Filipinos. They really mean Korean, Chinese, Japanese, and that's great. It's opportunities for actors or from those countries. But what about us? Filipinos are, one of the biggest immigrant communities here in America, and we're lacking in representation on TV, even when it comes to medical shows where nurses are predominantly Filipinos. But I can feel that there's, change is happening. It can't come too fast. It can't come fast enough, but I feel like it's slowly but surely moving in the direction of more representation for us.
So why then is The Unusual Suspects such an important show?
It's a heist movie.
What do you say? When do we start?
Yes!
And we're Filipinos that are part of it. I mean, I never thought I would be alive and be part of something that's breaking ground in a lot of ways for Filipinos. Filipinos, for better or for worse, are stereotyped as caring individuals who take on jobs as nurses, as nannies, as service workers, and that's great. But I feel like The Unusual Suspects casts us, shows us in a different light that says to everybody that we're so much more.
In my opinion, the heist theme to represent Filipinos is rather unusual, but I'd just love to hear your thoughts on the heist theme as well as just the story in general.
Without giving too much away, it is a heist movie, but really at the end of the day, it's a story about these group of women from all walks of life, different experiences, all coming together and finding common ground and kind of just like showing love and utmost friendship for each other. And that's, it is a heist and it's fun and it's crazy, but at the end of the day, that's friendship and female friendship and empowerment is the heart of it.
Speaking of women and female empowerment, how does this show represent Filipino women differently?
The usual perception of Filipinos, not just in film, but just in everyday life, is that we're subservient, which we're not. We are caring, but that also doesn't mean that you can step all over us. And I feel like in The Unusual Suspects, all the Filipino characters, but really all the characters, all the female characters in it, but specifically Filipinos, were shown as these well-rounded, fully fleshed human beings that have peaks and valleys and dreams and hopes and fears. We can go crazy, we can care for each other, we can have fun, we can cry. And it's just, we're no different than any other normal human being. We're not, it's like, stop branding us as subservient or as so and so and so. We're really just like any other woman, any other person in this world. And yeah.
Can you draw parallels with Evie, your character, and your real life?
I could transpose Evie's experiences with my mom's experiences, I was raised by a single mom working just a thankless government job that salary is like so low, barely enough to support her and me. And just her strength and resilience is why I am where I'm at. And unfortunately, that story that's not unique to my mom. That's the story of the 99% of Filipino moms who are struggling every day in the Philippines. So I think I really, 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 really worked hard to embody that, my mom's experiences and the experiences of all these Filipino moms who are struggling every day. And I really try to do justice and really represent them in Evie.
What has motivated you to pursue acting?
As a kid, I was always part of school plays. I always had this deep, deep love for acting, but looking like me in the Philippines, where most of the actors who make it look a certain way. They're tall, they're half white.
Mestiza.
Exactly. They have Eurasian noses. I never entertained the thought. It's like, if I had that dream, well, I probably subconsciously squashed it as a child. When I moved to the US, my husband's an actor. He's here in the periphery. He's been an actor for several years before that. So he saw, I don't know what he saw, but I think we were just playing around with some scenes that he was working on one night. I don't know if I'm remembering it correctly, but he suddenly turned to me and he said, "You should be an actor. You should try being an actor." And so I did, and here I am. I mean, I'm compressing the story. There's like a lot of tears and struggles in between, but it was my husband who kind of brought out the hidden dream in me to become an actor.
As you know, my mum is Filipino as well, and she would tell me that in order to pursue the things that you want to do, in your career, that you need to have a fallback measure, which I'm sure that you can relate to that. But did you feel that there was this need or pressure to have to conform to a certain career or job?
I was being told to do something and I immediately thought, why? Why am I being asked to do something that I know isn't good for me, or something that I will regret spending all these years on, later on in life? I felt like I was a stubborn, hard-headed child, for better or for worse. So I kind of just broke my mom's heart a few times. I didn't finish college. I dropped out when I was in my last semester of my fourth year for something else. It's not worth telling the story this time, but yeah, I mean, to this day, my mom keeps saying like, "Oh, if it doesn't work out, maybe you can try doing something else now, just in case." There's always that immigrant mom who I feel like their heart is in the right place. They just don't want you to suffer. And they probably know how hard it is to make it in any industry, especially the entertainment industry. So I know that it's coming from a good place, but sorry, Mom, I'm an actor, and hopefully I'm here for the long run. But now she's proud, finally, because of Grey's Anatomy and The Unusual Suspects. Finally, after 6 years and 7 years, my mom is finally, I think, proud.
I mean, surely you've had a number of stumbling blocks in your career. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? But more importantly, how you overcame those stumbling blocks?
I've been acting maybe for 6 or 7 years. And one of my first few meetings was with a manager. And, he wasn't mincing words. He told me that, "Oh, you're Filipino?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm Filipino." He was looking at my resume and my photo, and he was right in front of me and not making eye contact, oddly enough. I'm like, "Okay." And he goes, "Okay, you're Filipino. So basically you're not really going to make it in this industry past one line, forgettable roles here and there." And that was heartbreaking for me because I wasn't prepared for that. I actually nursed that heartbreak for, I don't know, for like 6 months before I shared it with my husband, before I shared it with anybody. And it's kind of true in a lot of ways in terms of how the industry sees Filipinos. And like I said, it's changing. But back then, there were really no doors open for us specifically. So thankfully, what my husband did is we have a small production company, small, but it'll be big soon. We have a production company, and we co-wrote and co-directed a short film about a Filipino immigrant. And that short film opened doors for me. Like it literally, if we didn't take matters into our own hands, then the unusual suspects wouldn't have happened for me, because that project got me my manager. That manager created opportunities for me when there were none. And I think Angie and Polly saw that film too, and they thought, oh, she might be good for Evie. So if we didn't do that, if we didn't create and write our own stories, then I wouldn't be here. And that's the biggest thing that I did to overcome the biggest obstacle then in my acting career.
Do you think that the Filipino diaspora is a minority specifically within the Asian community?
Filipinos are Asians. We're all Asians, but at the end of the day, we're all human beings. And I feel like we get so stuck in all of these differences, minority things that like keep us from reaching out and seeing the things that unite us instead of divide us. And I feel like that's why shows like this are important, because it provides a window when there are none for other people to see like, oh, Evie is like me, or Ami is like me, or Sarah Beasley is like me. It's like it helps unite people who might be from different backgrounds.
Surely the Filipino-American community is much larger than the Filipino-Australian community, but how visible are Filipinos in America?
The last time my mom was here, it was like 3 years ago or 4 years ago. We'd go to a mall, and I turned around, my husband and I would turn around, and she'd be talking to a Filipino. We'd go to the grocery, and then all of a sudden somebody speaking to me in Filipino, because we recognize each other. And they're like, hey, so where are you from? Do you cook for your husband? What food? What Filipino food? We're everywhere. It's like, I think we are here, at least here in California, we're the biggest immigrant community. So, I mean, nurses everywhere, just we're here.
Do you think solidarity in our community is strong?
I feel like I've been exposed to, I don't know if you guys are aware of Yung Chavez. She's like a Filipino journalist that's kind of like the international correspondent for everything that's going on in the entertainment industry and everything going on with Filipinos all over the world. She's kind of like feeds the Philippines information. And I feel like people like Yung Chavez kind of like provides a platform for Filipinos to find each other, especially here in America. It's like all of a sudden I see a fellow actor featured in Yong's show called, I think it's Balitang American News. Then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, Sheila Tejada, she made a film. Oh, she's a filmmaker. And then all of a sudden we find each other talking to each other and exchanging, nice things to say about our projects. And all of a sudden like, oh, would you like to meet up for coffee? Would you like to meet up for lunch? And all of a sudden, lo and behold, there's a community that's forming organically. So yeah, community here is pretty strong and pretty solid.
Why do you think there's this common perception of Filipinos being quote unquote good service people?
It might have something to do with when the Americans were there back in World War II in the Philippines. I know that because of the shortage of nurses and healthcare workers during the war, they created a system for Filipino nurses to be kind of like primed to become the caregivers and kind of like care for the soldiers at that time. And that might have been a natural transition into the things that we're seeing right now. We've suddenly become fetishized and exoticized as these like, I don't know, subservient caregivers who are meek and will do anything and say anything. And I feel like it's easy to warp things when, there's kind of like no guardian to kind of like protect the narrative a little bit. The Philippines being a small country, all of a sudden something Western comes along and puts their stamp on what they feel is reality. then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we have no say. Okay, I guess this is what we're seen as. So I feel like that has something to do with it. And I feel like it's a big job, and I feel like, every Filipino individual should do their part in maybe changing the narrative bit by bit.
I can only speak for myself, being Filipino-Australian, but I find that whenever I go back to the Philippines to find my roots, my heritage, it's always washed down by, a lot of Americanisms, and then of course you can't avoid seeing the Spanish colonial influences as well. And in my opinion, it's evident in the way that we communicate. So of course, Taglish is, just widely accepted. English is technically an official language, another second official language of the Philippines. And yet I know that my mum tells me about what she calls deep Tagalog. There's this deeper Tagalog that not even many Filipino nationals really know nowadays.
It's like, I feel like there's a lot of the Spanish deep words, but if you go way, way back, pre-colonial Spain, there's even words that are like, oh, I don't understand those words. And I feel like it is a lost, diluted language. And even like, we have this, how Japanese characters, kanji, and like Chinese characters and Korean characters, it's so beautiful and so unique and specific to their culture. Filipinos have that, but it's also a lost art. I think it's called baybayin, and it's beautiful. And I'm like, oh, why is that gone? Why is that not a thing that everybody knows about? So yeah, it is diluted, it is lost, and it's sad.
How do you think that the Filipino diaspora can reclaim that narrative, as you were talking about?
There are movements in the Philippines. Like a lot of my college, university classmates, I took up the arts, fine arts, advertising. I feel like there is a resurgence of younger people just kind of like bringing these things to the forefront, like a little bit of like national pride, in a sense that we're bringing back the art and culture, the beauty of it that was lost because of the 300 plus years of Spain and, the preceding American and Japanese invasions and colonizations after that. And I feel like we just have to be aware of what's out there and support artists and voices that are trying to restore the beauty of Filipino culture, because it is beautiful, and it is sad that those things don't exist anymore. There are tribes that have all these like amazing traditions, and the younger people are moving into cities, moving abroad, and now the elders are their culture and their history is dying with them. And that, I feel like that's when artists, filmmakers, documentarians, authors, all these things come into play to preserve and hopefully extend and preserve the life of the beauty of Filipino culture.
What do you think is a distinctively Filipino value that Westerners can take on?
Everybody's family in the Philippines. That's like what I always tell my husband and my friends here. That's kind of like what I'm missing a little bit. It's like everybody's a tito and a tita, an auntie and an uncle. Everybody's a cousin, whether or not it's like a fifth removed cousin. I feel like if everybody treated everyone that way, the world will just be so much more peaceful and so much more kinder. That's what every time I go back home to the Philippines, there's always these big celebrations where people just come together and just celebrate you and celebrate each other. And I miss that. And I think the Western culture could use a lot more of that. And I was reading about this the other day. There's something called bayanihan. It's called community. It's Filipinos in history would like, if somebody would need to move a house, a nipa hut, let's say there's a flood coming and they have to move a house, the entire community would just come together, and these men would literally lift up the house, which is usually on stilts, and just move the house while the women prepare food and kind of like make sure that everybody's hydrated and fed after this. And they do that without asking for anything in return, without expecting anything in return. And that kind of like selflessness and camaraderie and just sense of community, I feel like is so beautifully and uniquely Filipino. And we could all use a lot of that, to be quite frank.
And just to sum it all up, how do you think that we can make Filipino culture more visible?
Me as an individual, I like, for example, right now I'm writing a feature film that's a little bit of my life story. And there's a lot of the beautiful parts of what makes a Filipino that's written in that. And I feel like specifically for artists, we just have to make our voice heard. We just have to, we knock on enough doors, somebody's bound to open and let us in, right? So I feel like just be unafraid, write your story, and lift each other up. I think, if we're a community that, not just the Filipino community, just all of us as human beings in general, if we lift each other up and help each other, then our stories and our voices will be heard.